Hello and welcome to India Sense, NDTV's premier international show that will tell you the how, why and when of India's journey to superpowerhood. It's also going to give you a ringside view of geopolitics, global economics and trends in global technology. But first up, the headlines. Modi 3.0 comes back to power. Reform and governance is set to be the big push. Prime Minister Modi is in Italy for the 50th G7 summit. This is the 11th time India has been invited to the summit. As the leader of the global south and with an economic strength more than 4 out of the 7 members, is it time for India to join the G7 grouping? US President Joe Biden signs a 10-year bilateral security pact with Ukraine President Zelensky. The pact will ensure successive American governments will back Ukraine, even as questions remain on the use of American military assets by Ukraine on Russian soil. Despite opposition from institutional investors, Tesla's retail investors back a record-breaking $56 billion pay package to Elon Musk. It underscores the approval Musk enjoys from his retail base, who have backed the maverick billionaire. Legendary emerging markets investor Mark Mobius tells NDTV that India must focus on building strength in IT hardware with investments in semiconductors and electric vehicles. Mobius says India's diversity is its biggest strength. After European Union slapped heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to as high as 48%, China may respond with limited but retaliatory hikes. The move could signal increase in trade tensions between the two, even as EU tariff hikes are set to kick in next month. The big story on India ascents. Prime Minister Modi has come back with a historic third mandate, the first in 62 years. His choice of cabinet is indicative of his focus on continuity of reform and governance. Modi 3.0 has a rare opportunity. It stands at the cusp of transforming India into a $5 trillion economy by 2027 and $7 trillion by 2030. This economic heft will also pave the way for India's dominance in geopolitics. But to achieve superpowerhood, continuance is important, but just one among the many things. So what all should Modi 3.0 focus on for India's ascent? 3 things. First, it needs to focus on big-ticket reforms. Second, it needs to identify push areas. And thirdly, big resets for governance. In fact, Prime Minister Modi gave a hint of all this in his speech. Listen in.
विकसित भारत के लक्ष्य के लिए हम खूब मेहनत करेंगे, जमकर मेहनत करेंगे। हमारे पास रुकने का, थमने का समय नहीं है। ये राष्ट्र नीति के लिए एकजुट होकर आगे बढ़ने का समय है। विकसित भारत के हमें निरंतर बड़े फैसले लेने हैं। भारत के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए उत्तम फैसले भी लेने हैं।
Now, reforms are needed for manufacturing to grow, for increasing exports. Now, we've emerged as major players in mobile manufacturing, but that isn't the case in other areas. India is punching way below its weight and lagging behind a country like Vietnam, which is a sub-100 million population nation. With the world's largest working age population, India must have at least 5% share of the global manufacturing pie, not the present 1.6% that you see on your screens. In labor-intensive manufacturing, India's share is a paltry 2.7%. And this is an area where we must aspire to reach possibly 10%. For that, Modi 3.0 must invest in semiconductors, electronics manufacturing, electric vehicles, defense manufacturing, all this and much more to grow to the levels that we should ideally reach to be a superpower. Listen in to Prime Minister Modi making a reference of this.
हमने भारत को दुनिया का दूसरा सबसे बड़ा मोबाइल मैन्युफैक्चरर बनाया है। अब इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स, सेमीकंडक्टर और ऐसे नए सेक्टर्स में और तेजी से काम किया जाएगा। हमने देश के डिफेंस प्रोडक्शन और एक्सपोर्ट को बढ़ाने का प्रयास किया है।
Now let's come to boosting exports. For that, free trade pacts need to be signed. Now, America is India's largest trading partner, but it's presently jostling between the first sitting president to have his son convicted and the first former US president to be convicted of felony charges. This political turmoil will delay any trade discussions. And so the focus should be on EU, where trade has grown rapidly. India's ICT exports to EU have grown from about 1.5% to 5.5% in the last decade, telling exactly why EU needs to be prioritized in trade talks. And the last aspect of ensuring India's ascent is to ensure that there is continued investments in infrastructure and people as the two push areas. India has built the highest per capita expressway in Asia, and this momentum must extend to port connectivity. As for investing in people, it is skilling which will help us climb the tech ladder. AI will throw up new jobs, make the present ones redundant. So it's India's 3,000 ITIs and 30 Skill India international centers that will pave the way for ensuring a skill roadmap for Indians. After all, the backbone of semiconductors, defense manufacturing, and continued success of Indian IT companies is better trained manpower. And the last piece of this puzzle, which is the funding part, most crucial, how do we go about funding additional expenses in infrastructure, skilling, incentives for manufacturing? Well, for that, India's finances have improved remarkably. Our current account deficit has declined by 2.7% of the GDP. This means that India went from borrowing about 3.5% during the 2010 to 2013 period to only 0.8% in the past 5 years. And India can now sustain this additional spending by borrowing much less from the rest of the world. And add to this administrative reforms for better governance, and what we get is the roadmap towards India's ascent to be a superpower. On to the wide-angle segment of the show. The first foreign visit by Prime Minister Modi in his third term has been to the G7 summit in Italy. G7 is a group of the 7 most industrialized nations, comprises of USA, UK, France, Italy, Canada, Japan, and Germany. India is not a member of the G7, but it is a special invitee to the summit. But this isn't the first time that India has been invited to the G7. In May 2023, when the summit was held in Hiroshima in Japan, India was an invitee. Before that, in 2022, when Germany was the host country, India was an invitee. In 2021, UK as the host invited India as a special guest. And in 2019, France extended a special invitation to India. In effect, India is a permanent special invitee to the G7 summit. G7 cannot ignore India. It cannot ignore India's opinion. As a responsible power, India is the leader of the global south. It is the world's largest democracy and the growth engine of the global economy. In fact, the Indian economy is now bigger than Canada, UK, France, Italy. That's 4 out of the 7 countries that make up the G7. India's economic might is a compelling enough reason for New Delhi to be included in G7. It's time G7 should become G8 with India as a permanent member. Increasingly, with the UN Security Council unable to address deadlocks between US on one end and Russia and China on the other, it is the G7 that has become the primary vehicle to navigate global political upheavals. And since China continues to block India's entry into the UN Security Council, entry into the G7 will ensure its rightful place. But it's not just economic power. India's growing military might is another reason to be inducted into the G7 to make it G8. India is the third highest military spender in the world. And lastly, a new G8 with India as a permanent member will also be at the forefront of addressing climate change that disproportionately hurt poorer countries, particularly those in Asia and Africa that the industrialized Western countries have no idea or have limited idea about. In fact, take a look at what all has India achieved with the G7 as a special invitee in the last several years.
Prime Minister Modi's visit to the G7 summit is the 11th time India is attending the G7 summit, 5 of which have been under the Modi administration since 2019. So why has a group of developed industrialized countries invited India year after year? Take a look of what India has brought to the G7 table in the past 5 years. In 2019, at the Environment Session, Prime Minister Modi brought India's sustainability efforts to the fore. India highlighted its drive to eliminate single-use plastic, conserve water and focus on solar energy. Since G7 does not have representation of countries struggling with poverty, environment and other challenges, India's solutions offered opportunities for poorer countries with solutions that they could emulate. In 2021, as the world battled the COVID pandemic, PM Modi spoke about One Earth, One Health. India's call for global unity, leadership and solidarity to prevent future pandemics resonated with all other members. India emphasized the responsibility that democratic and transparent societies have in ensuring the world is better prepared and equipped to handle future global health risks. As the Ukraine conflict skyrocketed energy prices, it pinched poor countries the most. India advocated for the rights of poor countries to get energy at affordable prices. As the voice of the global south, PM Modi urged G7 nations to think not just for their interests and ensure energy access is not the privilege of only the rich. As the Ukraine conflict raged on, India stressed on the need for dialogue and diplomacy to resolve conflicts. As the leader of the world's biggest democracy, PM Modi highlighted the importance of addressing conflicts from a humanitarian view than just a political or economic prism.
We live in times of war. Since the end of Cold War in 1991, the world hasn't experienced a more violent time than now, with countries waging war over each other for months and years without any signs of it ending anytime soon. But disturbingly, it's not just countries that are at war with each other, it is the ever-growing rise of non-state actors that is now a worrying trend. From terrorism to drug cartels, it is the non-state actors that are now the biggest security threat to mankind. Add to this transnational actors or terrorist organizations like ISIS that operate in many geographies across continent, making this world a very dangerous place. Now, as per the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, 59 armed conflicts took place worldwide last year, led by the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. And it was Africa that topped the list with 28 conflicts, followed by Asia with 17 and the Middle East with 10. Europe recorded 3 conflicts in 2023. But this is just part of the story, because while the number of conflicts grew, the number of countries that experienced it declined from 39 to 34, indicating concentration of tension and war in fewer countries. The PRIO report shows that the conflict landscape is now becoming increasingly complex, with more actors operating within the same country. 2023 was the third most violent year since 1989, only to be surpassed by 2021 and 2022. And in fact, in 2023, battle-related deaths from conflict stood at a whopping 122,000. In the past 3 years, there's been a dramatic increase in battle deaths due to three main reasons. One, the civil war in the Tigray region in Ethiopia. Second, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And thirdly, the Gaza bombings after Hamas attacked Israel. Now, violence due to conflicts by organizations and terror entities not related to any government has also seen a significant increase, and most importantly for the Americas. For the first time, Latin America is now home to the greatest number of non-state conflicts, numbering 36. These are gang wars. These are drug cartels that are heavily armed and are fighting with each other. This is most acute in Brazil and Mexico. And according to this study, these drug cartels, notorious for running parallel governments, have made Mexico the most violent country in terms of non-state violence. A woman has come to head Mexico. It is only hopeful, and I am hopeful, that some of these statistics could change for Mexico. But these statistics are alarming, and it is the lack of concerted action that is truly shocking. Non-state actors are terror groups. They're operating with impunity and are now the biggest threat to countries, societies, and people. And it's time governments are made accountable for the safety of their people.